Well, good morning and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Decolonizing Justice. I'm Liz Keith, the Program Director with Pro Bononet, and am delighted to have so many people back with us today, and also would like to extend a warm welcome to those joining for the first time. Our gathering has grown by the day, with several hundred people now registered for various sessions throughout the week, including attendees ranging from Alaska to Puerto Rico and more than 30 states in between. We also now have legal empowerment practitioners from Canada and Mexico and beyond North America joining us. So welcome to all. This event throughout the week was designed through a collaborative steering committee that includes 3 incredible advocates and leaders in community-centered justice, in addition to myself. And that includes Nikole Nelson from Alaska Legal Services Corporation, Ariadna Goudreau-Aubert from Ayuda Legal Puerto Rico, and Matthew Burnett from the Open Society Justice Initiative. And all of us on the steering committee are so glad to share this online space with you all, and are also truly grateful for the participation and support of all of the participating groups and extraordinary speakers that we're hearing from this week. This week's gathering, as many of you know, is centered on a different theme each day, bringing together important voices working to advance people-centered justice. And I wanted to just take a moment to share a couple of remarks about the event title. We had a question yesterday and a question on Monday, very excellent questions about the use of decolonizing in the event title and the choice of that. And within the steering committee, we actually had different perspectives ourselves on that term. The steering committee and the groups that led the design of this convening include representation from Puerto Rico, Alaska, the mainland, all places where this term has distinct and different meanings and histories. And we decided jointly to choose it to reflect this event's focus on critically examining and in some cases deconstructing historical power structures, dynamics, and assumptions about our justice system and where legal knowledge and power does and should lie. But we recognize that the term does have different meanings, and colonialism and its legacy have manifested in different ways among the communities that are participating this week. So it may not be the right term for each community working on these issues or trying to encourage critical conversation about them, but we really invite ongoing conversation about this in the event Slack space, and Ariadna and the panel that will be convening us for the opening session on Friday will also discuss this further. So with that, just a couple of other logistics before we begin. We, as always, invite you to share your feedback and observations and questions through the chat box in Zoom or through the Q&A box if you have questions, and to use the Decolonizing Justice Slack space to connect with one another and share your thoughts, share more about your own work with others in the gathering this week. And we also would like to thank the attendees who are amplifying and building on these conversations on Twitter, and also my colleague Kathleen Klock, who will be doing live note-taking today. If any of you have questions or concerns or need technical or accessibility support, don't hesitate to contact our event facilitator, Jenny Rose Halperin, at the email address or Twitter handle shown here. And with that, I am very pleased to now turn it over to Nikole Nelson, Executive Director of the Alaska Legal Services Corporation and a member of this event steering committee, to introduce our opening discussion and panel today.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name, for those of you who don't know me, again, I'm Nikole Nelson. I'm the Executive Director of Alaska Legal Services. And I've had the good fortune of making my home and working for Alaska Legal Services and raising my family in Anchorage, Alaska, which is the traditional and contemporary homelands of the Dena'ina people for the last 20 years. Our organization, ALSC, is a nonprofit organization with a 50-year history of working in Alaska. And for those of you who may not know anything much about Alaska, it is home to over 229 tribes, and about 18% of Alaska's population is Alaska Native. This makes us very proudly the most Indigenous state in the Union. This series of conversations, as Liz said, that we've been having this week is called Decolonizing Justice. And again, we recognize that has different understanding in different communities. But for me, in the community I live and work in, the aftermath of and continued impacts of colonization on our Indigenous communities is ever present, particularly in the design and our design of our systems and institutions. And this very much includes our legal system and the practice of law, as well as the legal aid itself. I have also been very fortunate to experience Alaska Native leadership and values in action across our community in a wide spectrum of ways, including through tribal justice systems, and to experience daily Alaska Native leaders in action, not only in tribal government, but also leading the way on local, state governments and in our institutions, as business leaders and nonprofit leaders, and as my neighbors, colleagues, and dear friends. And so I am constantly reminded that there are other ways of doing things, and that every day we could be making choices to do things differently. Throughout this week, if you've joined us before, we've talked about how the legal system currently is and how it is one that has been built by lawyers for lawyers, and yet would deny lawyers to those who would need them. And the outcomes simply are not just. We know, as we have been discussing, that Black, Indigenous, and people of color, as well as low-income folks, are overly incarcerated. And on the civil side of things, we know those same folks are shut out of the system too often altogether. And we also know that there's a problem with decision makers. Judges in the system often do not have lived experience within the communities or on the issues that they're being tasked with deciding what is fair and what is just. Oftentimes, better funding these systems is a solution that is offered, but I personally question whether more resources alone would solve a problem that is foundational. In my way of thinking, the system would still, even if the system was fully resourced, it would still be heavily reliant on highly credentialed professionals with advanced degrees to act as intermediaries for those who are seeking justice. And those intermediaries, many of those are not going to have, they're going to have very different lived experiences from those they would represent. And the decision makers too still wouldn't be representative of those most impacted. So I'm hoping today that we'll be able to talk about different ways that we might, the different ways that justice could be realized and felt by the people that are seeking it in such a system. And I'm also mindful that as to the practice of law, I question whether it is reasonable to expect marginalized peoples to use the educational systems to gain credentials necessary to represent others in the quest for justice when those same educational and credentialing systems have been weaponized against marginalized communities for such a long time. So in this session, we have really, really wonderful guests, and we will be discussing different ways in which legal knowledge and expertise may be gained, and the essentiality in a quest for justice of centering the lived experience of those most impacted by the legal system in efforts to achieve more just outcomes. So I would like, maybe in the chat, you could help me welcome our wonderful honored guests today, which include Liz Lacquanay Medicine Crow, who is the president and CEO of the First Alaskans Institute, which is a nonprofit organization in Alaska that is doing very powerful work to address race equity issues and to heal our community in the aftermath of colonization. She is also a graduate of the Arizona State College of Law and holds a certificate in Indian law. We also have Jhody Polk, who is the founder and director of the Legal Empowerment Advocacy Hub and director of the Community Justice at the River Phoenix Center for Peace Building. L.E.A.H, as her organization is known, is the home of the National Jailhouse Lawyers Initiative and is the first participatory defense hub in the state of Florida. It is a grassroots nonprofit organization dedicated to growing legal empowerment in the United States, especially in vulnerable isolated, and incarcerated communities. Jhody is a 2018 Soros Justice Fellow and a formerly incarcerated jailhouse lawyer. Also with us today, we have Alana Greer, who is the director and co-founder of Community Justice Project. And as a movement lawyer, she supports community-led campaigns for racial justice and human rights. Alana is passionate about lifting up voices of the community members she works with and using her legal and analytical skills to support grassroots movements seeking to dismantle structural racism and inequality. She's an Echoing Green MBA Fellow and the advisory board member for the Dream Defenders and Law for Black Lives. I welcome our wonderful guests to this conversation. And I'd really like just to start this conversation by asking each of our guests to tell us a little bit more about themselves, the organizations that they work for. And I would like to start with Liz Lacone. Yes.
Nishish, how are Nicole? Night Law. Good day to everyone. For me here in Alaska, Yakesutat, good morning. I am here in my homelands of Tlingit Ani, which is Tlingit land, and I am in my village of Peacemaking, which is the mouth of the Don people, and our community is on an island in Southeast Alaska. So it's a little different here, but so a map of Alaska, I'm from this part here. And it's snowing, it's beautiful outside, and I'm really happy to spend a little bit of time with you folks this morning. Kadalatis, good people. Nunquaigar Gitkianan Sinudi Nankiagan. Nunquaigar Gitkianans is my grandmother, Mona Jackson. She was from Haida and then Heidelberg and made her home here in a Tlingit village of Tijuan. Kanahek Hinudi Chankiagan. Kanahek was my grandfather. Haslangadas, he was Tlingit. And this was his home village. On the map, it's spelled K-A-K-E. Slafkawasunudi Aukiong. Slafkawas is my mother. She's a weaver and a teacher. Bilchini Hinudi Hudkiong. Bilchini is my father. He makes his home here in our community of Cake. Lagunai Hinudi Hudkil Dikia. Lagunai is my Hudkil name, my Haida name. And the Q in my name actually sounds more like a G in our language. So it's Lagunai, and you can kind of swallow it, Lagunai. Atsakas Gustu di Kwalagan, I'm Eagle. Chichkitne Hinu Udi Ejang, and I'm a Chichkitne woman. Our crest is the hummingbird. And that's who I am as a Hudkil woman, I'm trying to learn to speak my Hudkil language. I'm a Hudkil woman. I'm a Haida woman, Hadas woman. I'm also Tlingit, Zagwe Dutchkan. I am the grandchild of the Kilawil people. Kach Adi, and I am Kach Adi, which is a freshwater Marksakai salmon. And we come from the Raven people, Yechna Chatzati. It's really an honor to be here with all of you. I work for First Alaskans Institute, as Nicole said. Our vision is progress for the next 10,000 years. So really good to see all of you virtually.
Thank you, Liz. Gunalachish. Thank you. And as I mentioned before, First Alaskans Institute has been doing really powerful race equity work within our community, and I'm very grateful for the work. We also have with us, let's start with, move over to Jhody. Jhody, could you please tell us a little bit more about yourself and your work within the community?
Yes, so my name is Jhody Polk. I am from Gainesville, Florida. I guess my journey started from inside of the Florida Department of Corrections, where during my incarceration, I was trained by the institution and worked as a law clerk, a certified inmate law clerk, which I prefer to be known as a jailhouse lawyer. And during that work and through that work in the law library, It was the first time for me and thousands of women that we really recognized how much the law actually impacted our day-to-day lives. It was actually during that incarcerated experience that I even really got a chance to even understood how civil law works and how human rights work. And through that role and that position, we really had to learn how to use the laws that were generationally set to prosecute us, persecute us. We had to find ways to creatively turn those laws into liberation and to really learn what legal language means to us. And so during incarceration, I found my identity as a lawyer. After coming home in 2014, it has been that vision of who I am and knowing who I am that has truly kept me fighting inside of this fight for liberation, even after incarceration. I'm still working towards going to law school, but in the midst of seeking the opportunity to be able to go to law school and become a lawyer, I've had the opportunity to work on the campaign as a Central Florida organizer in Florida to restore voting rights to over 1.4 million individuals who had felony convictions. Also, getting the Soros Fellowship didn't just allow me to start the Jailhouse Lawyers Initiative, but I was able to also travel to Budapest and take a legal empowerment training, which really changed my whole belief system on just people's relationship to the law and the role that lawyers and legal workers can have in community organizing and improving quality of life. So the Legal Empowerment and Advocacy Hub is very special to my heart. It is a space that I have used to continuously solve my own justice issues and problems, but it is a co-created space between law students, community members, lawyers, as well as our jailhouse lawyers and justice defenders on the inside. And then the peace building is, I guess what I have to say, is the cherry on the cake to be able to have had the experience of working with the River Phoenix Center for Peace Building in community justice processes and peace building processes has just personally transformed my life. But it is definitely a strategy to help people with inner freedom, in addition to the justice strategies that we're creating at L.E.A.H to help with, physical freedom and other forms of freedom from, physical incarceration. So I'm an excited peace builder, community organizer, but just also very proud to also represent my brothers and sisters on the inside of prisons everywhere, because we are truly a part of and will be a part of this movement for justice in the United States.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that, Jhody, and for sharing your work with us. And I also, I want to say it really resonates with me, the importance of the work that folks do. At Legal.Aid, one of the restrictions we have on LSC funded programs are we are unable, because of congressional restrictions, to represent people who are incarcerated. And I am mindful every day of that failing of the system, and that it leaves a great large number of people without access to enforce their civil rights in that context. And that is one systemic inequity that is apparent in legal aid organizations. So I yes, thank you for doing such wonderful work, and I'm glad to know you. Next, Alana, let's go to you now, Alana, and can you tell us a little bit about your work and yourself?
Yeah, Alana Greer is born and raised here in Miami. I'm the daughter of immigrants from Cuba, and come from radicals and fighters, and have also a chosen family of organizers and young people and elders who are fighting for things across Florida and in relationship with other folks across the country and the world, and really proud to stand with many really incredible leaders that came out of our backyard right here in Florida. And Community Justice Project, we support organizing groups with legal tools, but we look at the law from a very expansive position, and think about what other strategies, what other ways we can use the skills we have as lawyers, and also researchers and artists that are on our team to advance campaigns and to advance visions of justice that are led by people who are directly impacted by the issues that they're seeking to change. And I'm really excited to be on this call and to be part of this conversation with such an incredible group, not only panelists, but of the whole session that you all have over the past few days.
Yes, well, welcome, Alana, and it was wonderful to meet you too. It's been an honor to get to know you through this process, and I really appreciate the work that's being done that you're a part of too in Florida. I think there's some incredible things happening in that area. So one thing I wanted to say before I start asking some questions I have that I hope we can have a dialogue with our guests about. I also want to mention that if you have questions now that you have had a chance to know a little bit more about our guests, you can throw them up in the chat. And we will, so please, or not in the chat, there's the question and answer, the Q&A on Zoom. If you want to put your questions there, then we will do our best to direct them to our guests. So please, those of you out there, we'd love to hear from you about what you're wondering about. So one question I have, and something that I think about all the time in this work, is that I really wonder about whether or not a system as it currently stands, which is built by lawyers and for lawyers and requires highly credentialed and well-resourced intermediaries to achieve justice, even if that system were functioning there are a number of failings to it that we can all agree it's under-resourced. Not everybody gets a lawyer who should have a lawyer to be able to access those services. But I wonder what your thoughts are about whether or not just this idea of having, intermediaries, highly credentialed professionals or serve as intermediaries to accessing justice. If a system such as that, if justice could ever really be achieved through such a system. And let's start with Liz Lagone. Yes.
Lagunai.
Lagone. There we go.
Lagunai. Konnichiwa. I love it that you try, Nicole. That's all we can ask is for people to try and not be ashamed or embarrassed to try. It's something that I'm learning too, so I just really want to appreciate you for doing that. When you say my name, even if you don't say it right immediately, you bring all the others who've carried that name into the room. And that's one way we decolonize spaces. So to the earlier point about how you guys came up with a title for this, I'm not sure either, but I will tell you that it made me interested in participating because I think it's absolutely necessary. As you were talking, I had this thought pop into my mind. And I've never thought about it this way before, but for some reason it did. And so I guess I'm going to ask it in response to your question. Would we ask Nazi Germany how to decolonize itself? And the reason that that popped in my mind is because a question that one of our leaders here in Alaska asked last night on Facebook. Her name is Charlene Akpik Apak, and she leads data for missing Indigenous women. And she was talking about why we don't have a law school in Alaska, and about why we need one. Kind of, it would be incredible to start one. And then another one of our leaders, Megan Sigvana Topcock, who responded to her as well, said we should start our own tribal law school. And they really made me think in that moment of something that's been happening for a really long time, which is, your question is almost a trick question to me, because one has to presume that the system was designed for justice to occur. That there is some sort of actual knowing of what justice means in this system. When the system was designed to do what it has done, and when this system was designed to support manifest destiny and colonization and legalizing the theft of land and human beings, we're talking about the same system. The system has not been transformed. It's the same system. And so when I think about can it actually be used, I think that the people who have been able to use it to do good have been people who can turn tides. But I don't think the system itself was actually designed to know what justice really is. You don't have to have a law degree to know what justice is. And for justice to be something that is held onto by Western society and by the lawyers within it, as if they are the penultimate deciders of what that is, showcases exactly why it isn't. And justice is something that our people create. And when I introduced myself, in my introduction were really ancient roots of what justice and balance really looks like. Because I had to acknowledge my opposites, and I had to lift up my grandparents, my grandfather's people, because that is the way that our system works. And so there are so many other thousands of ways of delivering balance and justice in the world, and we've only been forced into one that has not been set up for our success. So that's my answer to your question, Nicole. Nice to show.
Thank you so much for that. And I think that's, that's I appreciate those thoughts, and it is something that when I think about it and grappling with the system that we live in, I really, that resonates with me very strongly. Yes. So Alana or Jhody, I have, do either of you have thoughts that you'd like to share on this same topic?
I think that this question of who gets to define what is it that we're actually seeking to dismantle, to build, what is that vision of justice that we're moving towards, is the fundamental question to see what can get us there. And I think we really have to be centered on who is defining that vision and how that division is being shaped. And I don't think that's to say that lawyers and the law cannot play a role in achieving it, but it has to be fundamentally oriented towards understanding what it is we are seeking, and an understanding of power, an understanding of how the system, the colonization system in the first place, was created, and how as people who have privilege in those systems of power by virtue of our degree, by virtue of other factors that each of us may carry into the world, how is it that we can first fundamentally understand that, and then think about using those tools to dismantle. And for us, and for me, I think that really has been about centering around organizing and centering around where people are trying to build collective power, and how can the law be used both as a defensive tool, which is far too often what we're needed to called into, not needed, but called in to assist on. But how else might we think about the spaces until that time is we're able to fully dismantle these systems, to think about taking up space, creating space for people to take up in those areas, creating space to shine light on the ways the system is failing from as we're moving through it. And so I certainly don't think that lawyers or the law on itself can achieve justice, but it can play a role in helping us dismantle the conceptions that we've been given of what justice is, and lifting up what it can be from those who really have much deeper experience in seeking these in the systems that we've been presented.
Thank you, Alana. That's really an excellent point, and I think it's one that we're all wondering. I'm assuming our audience is a group of folks who we're advocates for justice. We hope for more just systems, but again, how can we use that intention to achieve that outcome, I think is the is the question, right? And how do we work to create that space? Jhody, do you have, can I get you to, can I hear your voice on this question?
Absolutely. And I guess for me, that is the why, for me. It has been amazing to see the relationship between law students and even jailhouse lawyers when we're creating these legal empowerment, shared learning, shared power spaces. And so to not even just, have these working relationships, but when we can live together, when we can vision together, when we can learn from each other, it really does. It shifts and change the way that our future lawyers are stepping out, as well as it provides more opportunities for individuals like myself who wants to be inside of those spaces, who even at this point sometimes I have to tell myself, it seems like I've achieved all of the things I thought I would have to go to law school to achieve. But at this point in my life, going to law school, I recognize is also an opportunity for me to share myself and to be able to bring this, justice, which I, look at as myself. I believe that people and the law is justice. These systems are systems, but within these systems are people. And until we start having more relationship with one another, just like a lot of, my sisters here said today with, organizing and, really honestly looking at these spaces, but it's going to also take relationship. And so there are a lot of us who are wanting to step into the role of lawyers, step into the role of judges, step into the role of law enforcement, step into some of these systemic roles that are real people that don't have, systems intentions. And so it has been through my partnerships when schools have said, oh, we're not going to let formerly incarcerated people in. It has in a lot of places been the students using their power over these institutions to say, absolutely not. These are our people. This is our community, and rallying and standing beside us. Even, for example, in the participatory defense movement, organizers, community organizers taking over the pretrial phase of that system have now become some of the greatest champions and advocates to public defenders and being able to get the best outcome, of their case. And there's a lot of students that I work with that are even going into prosecution and, going into different roles that we would typically look at as harmful. But I like to always say, it doesn't matter if we have the best laws and policies in the world, if we don't have the right people enforcing, those policies, regulating those laws and policies, actually enacting them out with integrity, that's what's going to change. And so there are, I believe, good people. I travel the world, and it kills me that the first thing I hear from law schools is that we don't teach, students how to be lawyers. And that always just is weird to me. However, through the relationships that we're building with students, with the lawyers, from the community point, as well as from the formerly incarcerated point of view, I like to believe that there is some confidence that we are making more space for justice to be, co-created, but for us to also be leaders of our own lives. But can lawyers do it alone? Absolutely not. But what could we achieve together as community, as legal community? I'm very excited to keep walking that one out.
Excellent. Well, one thing we should acknowledge, thank you so much for that, Jhody, but also acknowledging sort of the practice of law in the way in which the law is regulated. Again, it keeps a lot of, it's designed by design to keep a lot of people out who would have lived experience within these systems. And so one of those things too, like when you take a bar exam or, sit for a bar, oftentimes there's an extensive questionnaire that may keep out people who were formerly incarcerated from practicing law. And so that's a barrier that's holds back many people with lived experience that would, it's something that we need to think about changing as well if we hope to create more space for people with lived experience within the practice of law. that's one thing I think about, and I'm not sure, Jhody, if you have thoughts about that, or Alana, or Gonai.
I mean, we still have a long way to go, but I just have to, give a big shout out to the National Bar Association of Justice Impacted People, as well as law students at Yale, the law students over at NYU. There is right now a collective nationally of law students that has a coalition called Beyond the Bar, Unlock the Bar, that are working towards removing those barriers, and not just doing it on their own, but doing it with folks on the outside like myself, as well as working with jailhouse lawyers on the inside. And so that gives me hope. There's still a lot of places that has their uptight barriers and whatnot or whatever, but the more places that we go and unlock the bar, the more power that we harness to be able to push that, push those practices throughout the country and have more opportunities than not.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Liz, can I ask you a question? One thing I think about, I oftentimes think about what our system might look like if it were designed by the people most impacted in the system, or if it were designed with additional voices at the table. Do you have any thoughts on what different ways of achieving justice might look like?
Yeah, Ganesh. Well, I have an example that I can share from my own homelands, that our organized village of Polk, which is our federally recognized tribe here in my village, utilizes, and my uncle is the caretaker of, and it's called Circle Peacemaking. And Circle Peacemaking is about balance and restoration and about healing. And, one of the things that I really appreciate about the process is that it's human-centered, and it operationalized really ancient knowledge about how we can take care of each other in a good way, and put that into practice when people are at a breaking point in their own lives, when they're making decisions that are harming themselves, their family, or the community. And how to help them understand what they're experiencing in the context of a loving community. And so, from a formal process down to informal process, the way that looks in our homes and the way that it looks in a formal proceeding is essentially the same. And, I'll share an experience that I had with a young relative of mine who was caught breaking into a car, and he had the ability to decide whether he would continue down the state prosecution path, or if he would go through Circle Peacemaking. With Circle Peacemaking, you could go through the process, and then you would have some things that you would have to do as a kind of follow through. And the state process was kind of held in abeyance. And if those things were lived up to, then that would go away. And the community is invited in and kind of given a little bit of the background about what occurred. So anybody from the community is welcome to come. And we sit in a circle together and we hear the details about, what occurred. And starting from the oldest person all the way to the youngest person, everyone has a chance to speak to that person who was in that situation of causing harm. And everyone has a chance to speak to them. And can you imagine what those messages are? Those are messages of affirmation, of love, of holding them accountable with rigorous love. Not the shallow kind, the real kind, the kind that comes from your gut, the kind that says, we only talk to you like this because we love you. This is what our elders say to us when we are out of alignment. And that's where the words come from. If we did not care about you, we would not waste our breath, because our breath is sacred. So we are going to take the time to tell you how much we love you and how wrong it was that you did these actions. And to a person, it's just an incredibly moving experience that's healing for the whole community and the person. And the person's the last one to respond. After they hear everybody say what they need to say, it takes as long as it takes, then that person can respond. And what happens is an awareness and an understanding about how much they mean to everyone. And then together, they work out a plan for what restoring balance will look like, what actions they will take. And then they follow through with that plan. And in our community, that's been really effective, especially with our young people. So like extremely high recidivism rates, but not when we use circle peacemaking. Completely the opposite when we use circle peacemaking. So that's an example of our people's wisdom, our people's ancient knowledge, our people's love for each other put into action. And again, it's called circle peacemaking, and there's so much out there about it now, but it's a way for us to sit in circle. And when we sit in circle together, there are no sides in a circle. And I heard that said best by someone in a dialogue we hosted, and I've always really loved that. So finish, Nicole.
Thank you. And I think that is such a wonderful example of, I often think about the legal system, the Western legal system, and how really it just allocates blame. Its main function, or the way that it operates, is really just assigning blame. And it fails to really, I think most often, acknowledge that people who are having disputes are oftentimes needing then to go back into the community and have an ongoing relationship with each other. And we've just, set them up to be adversaries and allocated blame and then sent them off. And, I really appreciate my experience with my understanding and experience having seen tribal courts within Alaska. I really appreciate the community building and the love that is apparent within those systems. And I often wonder what ours might look like if it were different. So thank you. Alana, I have a question for you, if you don't mind. Alana, I wanted to ask, I know that your organization, you have on staff, you have artists, you have storytellers, and can you just tell us a little bit more about how that works within your organization, and particularly about the role of the storytelling role within your organization?
And I'm sorry, Nadesh couldn't be on this panel today. She had a conflict, so I guess stuck with me instead. But she's our director of community research and storytelling, and comes from a journalism background, a really community-rooted journalism background. And it really, I think we started experimenting with collaborations with artists out of necessity, and just to kind of some of the folks who are around in our community. It started when we were working with a mobile home community that was being shut down, and we were part of a fight supporting the leaders there to keep the park open. And many folks had lived there for 30 years, and we had a poet that we were in a relationship with that was around and free, and we were litigating the case, and it was very draining and took a lot of the human experience, stripped a lot of it down, as courts and our systems do. And so we had Aja Monet, who's an incredible poet and organizer, had just moved to Miami and started doing poetry sessions after our litigation and organizing meetings. and people started talking about what home meant to them and really unearthing so much more that we just could not get through the tools and the constrictions that we had as lawyers and even as organizers in the space. And it really was a transformative moment for me and my co-founder. And so we've just since then really been trying to create more space to be really intentional, not just using art as and storytelling as kind of an output, like, oh, we can also just post this on our website or have a storytelling bank or do XYZ thing. But what does it mean to really co-create with people who have other ways of looking at the world, other visions, other ways of tapping into the human spirit, into this work? And so that, and it's been so interesting doing that, like not just having that as like the end product, but having L.E.A.H and having other artists on our team, like in staff meeting, or when we're talking about litigation, or we're talking about a strategy that is more coming from a traditional legal place, how else might we be able to tap into all the ingredients in front of us, in front of the incredible brilliance that is coming from our clients and our organizing partners, and help and add to that. So one example recently, we're working with people who are being evicted across the state. There's a huge crisis right now around displacement that has only grown because of this COVID crisis. And so, we have these one-on-one cases that come out of the organizing campaigns, but L.E.A.H has been able to work with some of the tenants who are in this fight and not only been able to tell their story to traditional media, but able to testify at the UN and then turn that story into something that they're going door to door and talking to other tenants about, and really help bring people into their power of using their voices in ways that not only may be able to be much more effective advocacy than I can do in front of a judge, right? The right to actually do that in those limited spaces, but really bring what we're not able to talk about and we're constricted by in the legal environment into the world in ways that actually are shifting and changing the contours and the violent systems that are around folks. And I could just say one other note to Lagwane's point about the point of the circle makers and circle keepers here. One, it just reminded me of we work with a group called Power U Center for Social Change of young people who are trained circle keepers and deeply involved in restorative justice in schools. And we got asked a few years ago by a judge here in our juvenile court to come by for a mock trial. He said, come by and would you present? And so we brought some of the young people along with us, and they were able, instead of just participating in the structure, like this is how our court system works, they actually got up and took the exact same facts that mock trial was running for other students and did a circle with it. And it was such a transformative moment for the other lawyers and the board members and other folks in the room who had never seen it. They were like, what is this? What's going on? And it was, I was shocked by how, I should not be because it's so amazing in space, but how much it moved folks that are entrenched really in these systems. And they've been working with Soul Sisters and other groups really in trying to explore how they can bring some of those principles into other spaces, into juvenile courts and into spaces that try to undo some of the harm that those systems are built on. And so I think there's no way that I could have conveyed the power of those circles by explaining it or by writing them a brief, or you had to see it and experience it. And I think having it be led by young people was such an incredible, it just made I could never put together all the advocacy points and deliver it in a way that they could have. And so I think really thinking about that, not only as our commitment to decolonization, but as a very practical commitment to like, how can we be best advocate for the things that we're asked to, like, there really is the strongest voice in the room. And so how do we help nurture that and deliver it?
Thank you, Alana. Thank you so much. So I have so many questions. So many. One thing I wanted to ask, and I also want to give some time. I have not looked at our chat yet or the Q&A, but please, if you have any questions for any of our wonderful panelists, please throw them up in the Q&A. And if you happen to put them in the chat, because I misspoke earlier, perhaps Liz Keith can help me with that to see if there are any in the chat, so I'm not scrolling through that. But one thing Alana, your comments remind me of, there was a convening that sort of that happened in Puerto Rico last year at this time when we were talking about legal empowerment. And I was struck during that during that conference or during that session that we asked people to come up with a definition for legal empowerment, what that meant to them, what we all meant. And so we all sort of brainstormed together, and there were many different people participating from the community. And out of that it came this idea that legal empowerment, that there were different ways of achieving justice, that legal empowerment was blending legal knowledge with community knowledge. And it happens when legal empowerment is when there was, and I'm sort of botching this, but essentially when community knowledge informs legal knowledge, and that the two work in conjunction together. And there was also some comments about that, the law isn't the only way to achieve justice. We can do that through art and through food and through gardening and different ways. And so I guess I'm just reminded of that as we think about how we create space for other voices in our legal system, which to my mind is not the same thing as a justice system. La Gonai, just gonna get it right before the end of this. Do you have any thoughts that you'd like to share on that? About the importance of including other voices? Sorry.
I have so many thoughts on that. I guess I would say that there are really incredible people who are doing this work on a daily basis. They have blistered hands, and but they don't have blistered hearts. And they keep working in this area, despite the fact that the system has proved that it may not be worth saving. There's a lot of people who have invested so much time, and so much of their ego and who they are is wrapped up in a system that was designed to do exactly what it's doing. And as much as you may have good intention to try to dismantle and decolonize it, I go back to my first question. And I think that what has to happen is that Western law and its conceptualization of itself needs to turn to its older sisters. It needs to turn to its older sisters, and it needs to learn. And it needs to absorb, and it needs to grow, and it needs to transform itself. And I think that there are so many people who have given their life in service to trying to make it something that it never was. That doesn't mean that their service was given in vain. The things that people have been able to do are monumental acts of miracles, because this is a system that's designed to be the way it is and have the result it has and the impacts it has, the outcomes it has, the statistics it has, the way it operates. I mean, it's a magnitude force to be able to be someone who performs a miracle in that space. But we shouldn't have to require that. Justice shouldn't require a miracle. And so that's what I think about when I think about not just bringing people into Western, because I don't want more people to get churned out in that system. I want that system to learn. I want it to mature. I want it to grow. It has a concept of itself that thinks and has imbued itself with this idea that it's this ancient system of justice and balance. But all it has done is underpinned and supported the structural racism we're all experiencing now. So maybe it doesn't know best, and maybe it should learn from the ancient societies and knowledges around the world that have things that it could learn from. So,
thank you for that. And I think that's an incredible. I love the framing of this. I love the idea, not the idea, or thinking of it in a way of growing and learning, and looking to other ways of knowing and doing that it could learn from to transform itself, and that we might be really better suited if we took that approach to it than some of the approaches that we are currently taking. Can we talk a little bit about next, maybe, I guess one thing, if we're talking about transforming these systems and transforming and helping them grow and learn and become different, can I ask our panelists to think about sort of a future, if a future where we imagine sort of a more just world that we lived in that produced the outcomes that we want, what steps might we take to, if we're committed to that, what steps might we take to sort of head that direction? And I guess I'll, Jhody, do you have thoughts to start us off with that? What steps could we take to achieve the transformation of the system that we have now, so that it, you know, what steps might we take to achieve that more just future?
You know, honestly, for me, even, you know, just kind of listening in this morning, I can't, unfortunately and fortunately, live my life so much thinking about the system. You know, like all of the focus is on the system, the system, the system, the system. But I grew up in those neighborhoods, those isolated communities. I'm still a part of those communities where there is no system sitting there that we're looking at or pointing the finger at, or, you know, giving credit to the problems and the issues. I mean, these are generational issues that have us to believe that we're the problem. And so I think right now, as community, as what we have to be doing right now is, you know, healing. And actually what that looks like, it's one thing to acknowledge all the harm that the system is doing and what that system has done, but it is a completely different other, you know, perspective when you have lived underneath that harm. To go into communities and to just say, we're going to vision a new way of justice, when the justice system that has been and always is, you know, or always have been, is highly replicated and duplicated in so many ways inside of those systems. And so for me, that is just creating space for us as, you know, justice impacted people to be able to heal, to be able to feel safe enough in our own bodies, in our own homes, in our own communities, to be able to even have a vision of what true justice looks like. For too many Black people, justice is only referenced to when it comes to the criminal justice system. But justice is actually environmental rights, you know, having knowledge of your reproductive rights, having just the knowledge of not even what the law is, but the fact that we deserve to be protected underneath these rights. And so to me, legal empowerment is the foundation. Legal empowerment and peace building is the foundation, and my single focus strategies on achieving justice, because we have to have that peace. We have to be able to look inside and see value, and to be able to, first of all, know who we are before we can even imagine, to learn about a system. And then on the other side of that, you know, legal empowerment beautifully to me lays out the formula that people have to be able to know and understand the law, and to be able to use.
So, Jhody, Jhody,
Jhody, hi Jhody, we're having a little bit of trouble hearing you. I'm going to try turning off your video, and then we'll come back.
It's the law.
So Jhody, Jhody, we were just very eloquently telling us about the about the need for communities to heal, and also and I think and you were talking about the legal empowerment, what that means to you. Can you hear us now?
Yes.
Okay.
And so what I was saying, in addition to, being able to have the space to do that healing inside of our communities without it just having to be an organizing space or a working space, but to live safely and to celebrate life inside of our communities. The legal empowerment practice of people have to know and understand the law to be able to be users and practice the law, to then become shapers and transformers of the law. And so as a legal empowerment practitioner, I focus, a lot. We have a lot of, movement on shaping and transforming, but there are still so many communities that have not had the opportunity to know and to use, to practice. And so those are, my two strategies. First of all, I want to enjoy my life. The fight isn't just on the outside. The fight, when you have been generationally, living underneath these systems, is very much inner. And so as we can celebrate life and reclaim identity that's just not rooted in bondage and suffering, I then feel very confident about legal empowerment as a strategy to be able to really not move people into one way or the other, but give people the opportunity to learn and to practice and then to be shapers, no matter where they are. Because one of the things for me is that, especially fighting and seeking justice, is that justice is everywhere and it's all the time, or it should be everywhere and it should be all the time. And so to me, that is the mother that is able to stand up to the school that is mistreating, or misusing school practices. That's even being able to demand justice in a social service, space where you're trying to get, different, resources, or it could be in a criminal justice, or it could be, and so we don't get to choose, just where we can grow justice. And so building up people, I think, is going to be the number one strategy.
Thank you, Jhody. And you should know that your voice comes through very powerful with or without the video screen. So thank you for that. And I think also this really important idea of, involving everyone in more voices in shaping the law and transforming the law and the essentiality of that. So thank you so much for that. Alana, I'll give you that same question to answer that same question.
Yeah, I mean, I think people are taking steps towards this every single day and have been for generations, right? And I think, and we see that through the lens of organizing, right? Communities have been coming together, been visioning, been fighting against these oppressive systems, really, since the beginning of colonization, the beginning of oppression. And I think, how do we situate ourselves in relationship to that, in relationship to folks who are doing that work, who are coming together and are building power, is the question for us around that. And envisioning and centering that vision of justice going forward. So whether that's young people, whether that's all the groups that are part of the movement for Black Lives, whether that's organic uprisings that are happening, that are folks on a corner coming together for the first time and marching, whether that's elders who are fighting back into the public housing infrastructure that is not serving them in the way that it should, whether it's, there's so many versions of communities coming together, of Black communities, of Latino communities, of Indigenous communities coming together in these in all of our backyards right now. And so I don't think it's just it's a question just for us in this room, or just for us certainly as lawyers or legal workers to answer, but how do we situate ourselves there, I think is the big question.
That's great. That is the question, right? How do we situate ourselves within that to make space for transformational change and learning? And yes, absolutely. Lagane. I'm gonna get it right. I'm sorry. Can I ask you the same question, your thoughts on the same question as well?
Sheesh, I just really wanted to appreciate Alana and Jhody's responses. One of the things that really resonated with me was around this concept of healing, intergenerational healing, and I think you both really touched on that because that's where it has to be, and that's one of the things that I'm really excited about. When I think about what tangible transformation looks like, and you know, you have such good examples here with Jhody and Alana already, or Alana already, and about what it looks like to actually center wholeness and humanity. And that's one of the reasons that I share that story about circle peacemaking, because that's what it does. And it allows those intergenerational roles, auntie, grandma, sister, cousin, brother, nephew, niece, clan relationships, opposites, the responsibility of what it means to be an opposite member of a clan, and the restoration and rebalancing that you have to do, the sitting in circle, the eating of food together, the sharing of laughter, the sharing of ceremony, of knowing that it's okay to grieve together, to heal and grieve collectively, is a powerful way to help our people who don't have other ways and other kind of outlets. And to be able to do that together is really important. Those are built into our ancient ceremonies that have outlived and outlasted everything that's been thrown at us to decimate and eradicate us off the face of the earth. And we're still here. You know, like Jhody was just saying, like she has every right to be happy and to live a full life, not in bondage, right? That's what you said. And that just really, I felt something burst in my heart when you said it that way. It just felt really beautiful. And our people deserve that. The system is not going to give us that. We give us that. We heal. And other people need to join us in that. Other people need to let go. It's called the Titanic. Let it go. And come to a place where we can celebrate life and who we are and bring everything that we are to the circle. I'm doing away with that metaphor of the table. You know, if you're not on the menu, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. Is that how it goes? And I just think, like, what a horrible analogy for humanity. Let's be in a circle around a fire together, and let's take care of each other and be good relatives.
Thank you so much for that, and for always getting rid of horrible metaphors. And I really like the idea of stepping off the Titanic too. I really like, that's a really good analogy too, when we think of our system. Thank you for that. You know, I'm going to ask Liz Keith, who has been looking through our chat, to pull some questions from there. And Liz, could you, she's going to help me out with that. I can't read through the chat and also pay attention to the conversation. So Liz, can you let us know what questions might be developing in the Q&A and in the chat?
Sure. Well, thank you all. This has been an incredible conversation so far. And in just following the chat, I have one question for the panel as a whole, or anybody on the panel who would like to speak to it, and then a related question that is more specific to Jhody. And the question touches on the role that college students and law students can play in this work. We have a number of people joining us today and this week who are either college students law students or recent graduates. And in our session today, we have several members of a wonderful program in Illinois called the Justice Corps, which places college students, recent graduates, and other volunteers in courthouses to help the huge numbers of people who are appearing in court every day without lawyers navigate that environment, and to make the courts a friendlier and more welcoming environment for those individuals. And the question is, I think, around this notion of supporting and accompanying people in various spaces. And Jhody, you talked about demanding justice in a social service space, and there were other remarks around how we can center our humanity in this work and in these settings. And I just wondered if any of the panelists had suggestions for volunteers who are providing legal accompaniment. It might be helping them navigate how to walk through that courthouse, or how to find information or resources. Any suggestions for people working in those court or other institutional settings to bring some of the accompaniment and healing and centering, continuing to center their humanity and lived experiences in that process.
So for people, that are working inside of these places, sometimes it's just as simple as how you treat people. There's a huge gap in between, when somebody's actually in the institution and then where you're actually living. And, we talk about trauma a lot in these times. And, even from just starting a participatory defense hub and doing participatory defense in Florida, when we see the families coming in, even though we are community-based, organization in the community of community members, that still doesn't remove, the traumatic experience that somebody is going through when they're going through any of these, processes or challenges, or trying to seek, some type of help, especially when you recognize that you're not getting the help that you need, is really could be a life or death situation. And so, a lot of times those aren't the spaces to flood people with information, to flood people, with some of our resources, our knowledge, and our skills. But just, being able to still, that space, and to be able to just allow a person to be a human being, to ask a question maybe 4 times, to maybe, not have it all together, I think is the most important part that us within these institutions can be doing, is making sure that that space is safe. For people to be human beings who are going through this process. And then how do we go beyond that? To me, that's showing up before there is a crisis. It's been mind-blowing to me to just even learn about data and how much data is used to, really track and dictate who a person is and what they will and won't do. And so there's enough data out there to show where we're needed outside of the institutional spaces. And that's just, to me, going to take us then going out of the institution, outside of those work hours, outside of, the job. And again, human being to human being, how can we then go into places where people are, and to begin to have these conversations, to begin to share resources, begin to share tools. But most importantly, when we're inside of that space, I think the number one thing that we can do is just create space for people to be human, because too many of us are expected to be the judge, we're expected to be the lawyer, we got to be the mom, we're also, the person that's going through it, or, we have to take on all of these roles. And so oftentimes people don't get to just be, a mom, a sister, an individual that's going through a sensitive situation.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you. Would anyone else on the panel like to share your perspective on that question? Great. Well, Jhody, we have one more that is specifically for you. And there was a question from Molly who was interested in learning more about what law students are doing in terms of coalition building for campaigns like Unlock the Bar. And if you're seeing if they're getting specific support from academic boosters or other people in those their academic settings.
So yes, first of all, I like to say that I've been surprised at how many people are incarcerated inside the institutions. Not everybody has the same vision, ideas, and goals, but it has amazed me to travel around and to partner with different institutions and to see the wealth of resources and knowledge that just exists in some of these professors. And they are stepping up to the plate and, providing support and space for students to be able to go above and beyond. And so it's been very interesting because the coalition isn't just to us on the outside and us who are inside of prisons, but to be able to see these students and these, institutional staff build their own, coalition on the inside. And so the institutional problems and racism and discrimination and all those things, they become their problems, right? The institution problems. And so I've been fortunate to see, how that's coming together. Students are a whole different breed, especially to get them before, I guess, they get indoctrinated with all of, the other stuff. But when they get to interact with somebody like myself or, with me, it's just like no different. We have fun, we laugh, we talk, we joke. They don't see me any different than a peer. And so when they get those positive relationships with their community members inside and outside of jails, they become the number one person asking those questions at their institutions and then learning those laws and what are those discriminatory practices and actually advocating, within their institutional space. And so if you were interested in I know Unlock the Bars I know New York that's a specific New York coalition. Texas also has Unlock the Bars coalition that they have pulled together. But if you were interested in getting involved in that work, the National Bar Association of Justice Impacted Individuals is working with formerly incarcerated law students as well as law students all over the country. And so that is also like a singular space where these hubs and students are coming together. If that was something that you were interested in, and if you wanted to start that in your own school or to just be able to connect with other law students and members who have done that, that would be a good place to be able to connect with some folks.
Wonderful, thank you. We also have a comment and a question from Stephen that I think is for the panel as a whole and anybody that would like to field this. And Stephen notes that our primary focus here in this conversation and this week appears to be justice, but we know that at least one significant property of a justice system has to do with the social relations of power, and that those are fundamental in producing that power. And Stephen says if others on the panel agree, is there anyone who would like to speak to how those two properties work together and both help to define our system of justice?
I can speak a little to it. I mean, I think power is the fundamental question. And I think how we are moving through the work that we do, whatever issue we're working on, whatever systems we are forced to interact with or choose to work outside of as a result of the existing relations of power. I think if we are really thinking about the how of do we work, how are we both slowly and in large leaps chipping away at the way that we can rebalancing that and bringing power back to marginalized communities, I think is a fundamental question. I think that's why for me, I think that's why we're not an issue-based organization. We see there are so many fronts on which we could be contending for that. And even I think there was a question earlier, I typed on it, but about inner movement struggles about whether a reformist demand or a more abolition focused demand should be fought for. I think in moments, and those are really important struggles, but I think in any campaign there is opportunity to use that to sharpen our analysis of power, to sharpen our ability to move. And so how is that folding back into a strategy, not just from like a political context, but also political as an elected context, but from understanding how those realms of power shape our legal system and shape the ways, as we've talked about, like justice, quote unquote, like how that is acted upon communities as well. So but I think that as each and every one of us in the roles that we play have the ability in micro and macro ways to start to rebalance and shift that power and tear back power from the institutions that shouldn't be holding it that do. Whether that's something small, like who is invited to the meeting, who gets to shape the way this brief is written and what narrative really comes through in it, to much larger visions for that. And so I think each of us have a lot of opportunities each day in and day out to both do that in our current work and vision that forward.
And be educators and spreaders of the good news too. I did not learn about power until about 2 years ago at a Dream Defenders training, actually, Alana. And that was the first time in my life I ever heard about power, learned about power. Everything before then, I had been taught as resource, and that is so controlled on resourcing and never had learned or even understood what power was. And so I think once, I got that understanding, I got that training, that in itself then catapulted me to a whole other, level in just my own personal work as well as my professional and community work. To like, Alana, like you said, to be responsive to the needs of actual people. Because when we're in our institutional, organizational spaces, that looks a lot different than the experiences, of what people may be actually going through inside of, there, and I call it places of incarceration. I have a unique story of going to prison and getting free only because the prison was a complete model of the neighborhoods and communities that I was living in. There was no different, when I went to prison than the actual communities that I grew up in, my entire life. And so I think sometimes we take it for granted, just the knowledge and, information that we have around not just how these systems work, but what's actually holding these systems together. And so I think power has to be something that we don't just, fight for, so strongly on the institutional front, but we have to also be, generating and building that power, in with people, in the grassroots, in the community level as well. But just had to give that shout out. If it was not for being introduced to power and what power meant and my own power as an individual, as well as institutional, organizational, systemic power, I can only imagine what my organizing would look like.
Me?
I was thinking about a Maori professor, Uncle Graham Smith, a Maori man from Aotearoa, New Zealand. And he talked about the politics of distraction and the politics of inclusion. And I really feel like there's so much wasted bandwidth by people who know better and want to do better, but we get sucked into these things, these entities, these organizations that aren't centering and balancing the leadership of folks of color or folks who have suffered under the unjust systems and these inequitable systems. And so instead of following their lead, we end up kind of chasing tail a little bit. And so I think about what that means to be so ensconced in a system that doesn't allow us to just say, you know what, we know this is wrong. Why can't we just do something about it? This country has allowed children to be living in cages for how many years? And what has happened to actually intervene and stop that? And we have the ability, we have the power to change that. But there's so many people who are good-minded, good-intentioned, and who are really trying to stop all this stuff from happening, and yet it's happening. And so at what point do we shift our focus from Mordor, you know, and actually focus on the good people who are carrying the ring? I'm using a Lord of the Rings analogy. You know what I mean? But I just feel like there's so many good people, and yet we're spending so much time with those good people. And if we could just all just kind of focus on these people like Jhody and Alana and others who are the leaders, who need to be listened to, who should be supported in trying to do what they need to do. And, you know, one of the things that we say in our racial equity work is, you know, a lot of people talk about, you know, well, are you only preaching to the choir? Well, the choir isn't showing up for practice. The choir's out of tune. The choir thinks they got a free pass because they sang one song great at one concert. But this is a everyday practice kind of thing. You got to show up. You know, wash the dishes, get some blistered hands, be the people in the kitchen. And Maori relatives call it tea towel tikanga, which is the knowledge of the tea towel, which means being in the kitchen and serving the people, not being out in front. And that work needs to get done. And so when I think about where the true power lies, I think about it laying in our sisters, in our aunties, in our people, and they're the torch bearers that need to be followed. And I think that's how we rebalance, and that's how we can actually see people who are truly holding a collective power and not a power that just lifts up an individual.
Thank you so much for that. And I think that is just a beautiful way. I think we are just about the edge of our time, but I think that is just like a really amazing and beautiful way to send us out from this session, and to sort of sum up, I think, what is you know, I think the whole thrust of, I think, this session. One thing I just, you know, I want to mention, Liz, when we were talking in preparation for this session, I had asked a question, and your response was so wonderful. I would ask you to repeat it if we could. I asked, what happens when we fail to, what do we lose when we fail to include the voices of those most impacted in the advocacy for justice? What do we lose when we fail to include others in that work? And I asked you that question, and I will ask it to you again.
You're gonna have to tell me what I said.
You said use justice itself.
Yeah, we do.
And it was amazing. It really, you know, it just really hit home for me in a way that moved me deeply, as have all of the conversations we've had here today with Alana and Jhody. And I appreciate also the thoughtful and wonderful questions that we've had from the audience. And I appreciate so much the gift of the time from Jhody and Alana, and from L.E.A.H. I appreciate so much your sharing with us today. Thank you. Right.
Great. Well, thank you again to our entire panel for your sharing your voices and perspective and experience with us this morning. This has been an incredible conversation, and Nicole, our gratitude to you for convening it and designing it and hosting us here today as well. So we will take about a 30-minute break, and for those who would like to rejoin us at noon Pacific, we will have an excellent session focusing on participatory action research. So please rejoin us if you would like. And our thanks again to Liz and Jhody and Alana and Nicole for this terrific discussion. Thank you all.